Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. Stop me if you've heard this before. Georgia adds another commitment again yesterday. Couple of different things I like about the news as it relates to Corey Howard from Valdosta. We'll tell you about that. Georgia fans, have they been given the proper credit in which they feel they are due? We'll tell you why that matters on today's program. Special guest for us, our Mike Griffith, enjoying himself quite a vacation here. He is also not here today. And I'm saying that kiddingly. I wish him well. I'm going to be enjoying some vacation next week. So we're certainly happy for people getting a chance to recharge their batteries. We think summer's a great time to do that, but it is also providing us a great opportunity to speak to Cody Chaffins. We talked to Cody last week. Cody did a great job, does a great job every day. We will speak to him again today, too. So a lot on the docket here on this Wednesday. Georgia looking back on another commitment added last night. Looking ahead, and we'll have live coverage of this. You already know, Jae Lamar this afternoon. So let's try to talk about it all. We're glad you are with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Another day, another UGA commit. Perhaps that's also true for this Wednesday as well. We'll find out later on this afternoon. Of course, DawgNation have live coverage of Jae Lamar. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But for now, though, the man of the hour is Corey Howard from Valdosta, becoming what? Shadarius Tootle on Sunday. You had commitment there on Monday. DawgNation had live coverage of that as Kamari Brooks made his pledge. And then Corey Howard yesterday. Georgia trying to get its fourth commitment in as many days, and I think that's really fun. We'll get to the Lamar part of this in a minute. Let me talk, though, for a couple of minutes here about a couple of things that I really like about Corey Howard, the name that Georgia just added. I mean, look, Georgia goes into, an area down there, Region 1, South Georgia. This is, I would say, as much of a hotbed as exists in the entire country when it comes to recruiting. This is when it comes to just high school football in general. This is what our state does really well, especially in this part of our state. And you've perhaps heard me say before, a couple of different guys for different reasons we're going to talk about later on the show. Arch Manning played small private school football in New Orleans. Jared Curtis plays small private school football in Nashville. That's the Georgia quarterback commit for this cycle. Of course, you know that. And some people kind of wonder, well, playing against less than stellar competition, is that some sort of concern for them at the next level? People are saying that about Arch right now. They may eventually one day say that about Jared Curtis when he arrives at Georgia too. Certainly, we've heard some of that debate be kind of discussed a bit. I've said before, hey, an elite prospect is going to be an elite prospect no matter who they're playing against. So it doesn't bother me what your perceived level of high school competition is. The truth is, if you're a dominant prospect, you're going to dominate whoever it is that you're playing against. And so I've never really viewed elite competition necessarily as a prerequisite for the kind of prospect I would want at a place like Georgia. But while I don't necessarily view it as a prerequisite, boy, I sure do like it when it's present. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there is just an extra level of confidence you have about a guy like Howard because of the fact that he plays at Valdosta. He's in Region 1. You got the intense rivalry down there, what they call the Wintersville Classic between Valdosta and Lowndes. And you're playing the likes of a Camden County or a Colquitt County or teams like that kind of on a Friday night basis all throughout the fall. There is a level of, I think, confidence that exists for Georgia about a player like this that might not exist the same way if he's coming from a different place and playing, against a different level of competition. Now, what's cool about this is that Georgia also has a chance to do the same thing later on this afternoon with Jae Lamar, kind of the other side of the state over in the kind of the southwest corner in Moultrie and Colquitt County. But once again, it's another one of these Region 1 guys. It's another one of these guys that sort of comes from that same part of the state. And as Georgia has gotten better, as the program has ascended, the footprint for Georgia recruiting has become a little bit more national in its scope. Players from all over the country want to come to Georgia. And, we have a tendency to be a little greedy around here. So when Georgia can get the very best from a state like Texas or a state like California or a state like wherever, well, of course, we like that. But as Georgia recruits more nationally, we should not forget that the biggest advantage that Georgia enjoys is the fact that it exists in a talent-rich state that takes football so seriously and produces great programs that then produce great players that, in many cases, grew up wanting to play for Georgia. And I'm someone who I've been very lucky in my life. I've been able to go to – I've been to games in Region 1. I've seen the way in which they get 10, 12,000 people for some of these games. I've seen the passion that exists for high school football and the standard that creates for the programs that exist in that area. And here's what I can tell you. When you go to other places, for instance, not to pick on the state for a minute, but like, say, down in Florida, where you may have – and I've been to games like this, where there may be like 4 or 5 5-stars on the field, but they're like 200 people in the stands, and it's just not the same level of commitment to it. Coaches in Georgia are very well paid compared to our border states. And so what happens is you don't just have elite athletes, you have elite athletes that are cultivated in programs that take football very, very seriously. And even as Georgia recruits nationally, we shouldn't forget that is still the program's biggest advantage. The pipeline it has to some of the very best programs in the country here in Georgia with the very best coaches that are helping raise up that next generation of football player. Kirby Smart talked about that going back a few weeks ago. He was in Destin, Florida for the SEC spring meetings, and the subject of like NIL recruiting and all that kind of stuff came up the way it always does, and kind of how the game has changed for recruiting. And Smart, speaking to some reporters that day, I'm going to read you the quote, speaking to some reporters that day, talked about basically that even as recruiting sort of changes in the eyes of some, there are still some aspects of this that haven't changed at all. Let me read this to you from Kirby Smart. He says, "We've had some really good football teams. We've got a good state to recruit from. We got a great university recruit, too. Academically and football-wise, it's been a pleasure to be there." In other words, I love being at Georgia because not only do I have a great product to sell, I have got great potential players to sell it to right here in my own state. You hear Smart mentioning the value of in-state recruiting in that. And you see that when it comes to Howard, and you may see that later on today when it comes to Jae Lamar. These are the sort of recruiting wins that you can have a slight advantage in when you're doing battle. And I say slight because way down in South Georgia, you're actually farther from Athens than some of the programs that are down there. The other programs may have a geographic advantage over you, but there is still something about being in state. And that name, Georgia, the Georgia Bulldogs, carries a lot of weight down in South Georgia. That's why we love our South Georgia folks so much, because of what the Georgia name means down there. And Kirby Smart says, yeah, we're going to leverage that to our success. And even with all of Georgia's national recruiting, that is something that they do well. Here's another thing, though, that I really like about the Corey Howard edition for Georgia in this class of 2026. I think it speaks to something really interesting about Georgia that I don't think that Georgia gets enough credit for. And let me try to explain it this way. The other day, we were getting ready for Kamari Brooks and his decision, kind of doing some research on Brooks and kind of paying attention to some stuff. Obviously, we kind of know that down to the wire on that, that's a Georgia-Alabama battle. And both Georgia and Alabama had really put a lot of effort towards being able to get Brooks in their class. It had been kind of a long-standing battle between the two teams. But I also saw this on like the 24/7 sports site. I don't know the context for this. I'm assuming we could take this at face value, that just in like the last couple of weeks, North Carolina, obviously led by Bill Belichick now, North Carolina like extended an offer to Kamari Brooks. And in my mind, I'm thinking, and I won't pretend to know any of the backstory about why they're just now offering anything like that, but it sort of kind of feels to me like the sort of fits and starts, haphazard nature of recruiting for a guy that in Belichick that comes from the NFL, and a guy in Michael Lombardi who's essentially, a podcast guest, and all of a sudden now they're here in college football and they're going to try to figure all this stuff out, and they're just sort of reaching and grabbing and trying to put a strategy together and sort of figure out what's going on. That's what my perception of that is, and as someone who talks about Georgia every day, has spent my entire life rooting for Georgia football, I'm just really glad that's not what Georgia is all about. I'm really glad when it comes to Georgia's recruiting efforts, they're just a lot more, I guess the phrase you'll use is just more buttoned up than that. And I think in many respects, the Howard news is the perfect example of this, because Howard's one of those guys, and I would say this position fit probably creates more of this in football than almost anything else. Howard's tall enough, he's 6'6". Weight-wise, what is he, about 260 right now, something like that? And I think that for a lot of folks in the sort of recruiting industry or the scouting industry, I think there's a lot of sort of intrigue about what position does Howard really play at a place like, say, Georgia or wherever he might would have gone to for college football. At Valdosta, I think we saw him kind of used all over the place. He's almost athletic enough that he conceivably could be an outside linebacker, at least conceivably. But at times, I think they kind of had him lined up even over the football on the interior part of the defensive line, because a lot of smart coaches in Georgia like to use the athletic bodies on the inside of their defense because they're really hard to block, and interior pass rush is always going to be really valuable. And if you put the quicker guy on the inside, even if it's a size mismatch against some of the guys you're playing, the speed difference just becomes a really, really tough thing for opposing offensive lines to deal with. So we saw Howard kind of do that. And this thing of, well, is he a defensive tackle or is he a defensive end? Could he perhaps play outside linebacker if he were to kind of, slim down a little bit? All of that kind of becomes this thing where some programs are just confused by it, and some programs can't quite get the right vision from a imagination standpoint of exactly what he could be. So much so, and a lot of you who follow recruiting closely, I think, will attest to this, that when it comes to like the major programs battling for Howard, it was Georgia and it was Florida. And in the case of Florida, geographically speaking, they're probably the closest school to Howard. Valdosta sits right there on 75 at the border. It's sort of like last place to stop and get gas, and then the next place if you're driving, down to into Florida or something like that. So if you're heading down 75, Gainesville, Ocala, that area is sort of like the next big landmark you get to. So you got some real geographic advantage here for Florida in recruitment like this. So it's easy to sort of understand why they'd be kind of the other hat on the table, so to speak. But isn't it interesting that a program like Georgia that essentially gets pretty much almost everything it wants, they don't win every single recruiting battle, but boy, they sure do win a lot of them. It's clearly the sort of standard bearer for recruiting right now. They've won as many recruiting battles as anybody, as many contested recruitments as anybody, and yet they are also one of only two kind of like major Power 4 schools involved for Corey Howard. And it's that sort of double side of the same coin for Georgia that I just think is so interesting. They are really, really good at winning the competitive recruiting battles for the players that everybody wants. And also somehow, over the course of time, they have been really good with identifying players that other programs just didn't see. They have seen what could be possible, even though other programs just perhaps didn't. In other words, Georgia is just as aggressive about its scouting techniques as it is about its recruiting techniques for players it already knows that everybody else wants. And that, to me, is such a secret sauce for the Georgia program overall. In fact, it's one of those things where, and this is true at all levels, college and pro for certain, it's hard to get GMs or coaches or whatever else, it's hard to get them to want to reveal their scouting secrets. This is the type of thing, if you do feel like you have some sort of, keen eye for recognizing what others don't, you don't really want to give it away. And I would say at times it's been a little bit hard to get Kirby to sometimes talk about his scouting, a viewpoint too. But sometimes when you're in like a really good mood, Sometimes you can sort of get something you otherwise wouldn't be able to get, or if you haven't slept very much the night before, you get a little punchy and maybe all of a sudden you're kind of revealing stuff you wouldn't always reveal. Well, we perhaps had an example of this a couple of years ago. When I think about Kirby from a scouting standpoint, recognizing in a player like Corey Howard, the latest UGA commit, something that the rest of college football apparently didn't see because Georgia, along with Florida, were sort of the only ones in on a guy like this. And Georgia obviously pretty much gets whoever it wants. Like, how does Georgia do what it does from a scouting standpoint? Well, after Georgia had won the national championship over TCU, winning 65-7, and when Kirby Smart had to wake up very early that next morning, along with Brock Bowers and Javon Bullard, when they were there in that hotel in Los Angeles talking about the national championship, one of the things that Kirby did get into that day, it's a couple of years old by now, but one of the things that Kirby did get into that day is some of these scouting secrets. When Georgia is looking for a player, what is it that they notice? What is it that they're looking for? And what Smart said then is perhaps one of the things that also led them to a guy like Corey Howard here right now. This is Kirby Smart on this from L.A. way back in January of 2023 after Georgia just beaten TCU.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's got it figured out. I certainly don't think we have a secret sauce for identifying players. We all watch the same tape. The problem is I've come to the conclusion there's very minimal difference between player A and player B if they're both starting, both playing, and they're both getting recruited by SEC schools. There's minimal difference. The difference is in the hardwiring of that player. And I don't know, we all talk about it. We all say, well, I want the right guy. I want intangibles. I want him to have this and that and this and that. Like, the difference in these two is they hate to lose. Like, these guys hate to lose against each other day in and day out. And I've started saying, you know what? You're going to sign 3D tackles. You're going to sign 5 DBs. You're going to sign 2 tight ends. You're going to sign a quarter. Sign the ones that can't stand losing. And, you know, the ability part is important. It's not to be diminished, but sign the right mental makeup and get people that can develop.
So I think that is one of the most interesting things you're ever going to hear from Kirby Smart. And I think it's just based on what I feel like I know about football, I think it's just really true that the margins are so thin between what makes one player good and another great, what makes one player capable of handling the grind in the SEC and another guy not quite there. I just think that is such a real truth from Kirby Smart that he was kind enough to sort of allow us to have some window into after Georgia had beaten TCU. I think the words that Smart used there remain relevant in recruiting battles like Corey Howard. And I'm telling you right now, if I am one of these programs in the South and I see Georgia essentially only battling one other school for a prospect, I'm kind of left to wonder, did my scouts miss this? Should we have been on this one a little longer than we were? What does Georgia know that we don't? Because history would suggest that Georgia does know something these other programs don't. And it's not a perfect science. No one bats 1,000 on this kind of thing. But boy, if you get a few kind of big hits from the ranks of we're not quite so sure, but we're going to take a flyer, if you get a few big hits out of that, it changes your roster. In that particular clip, Kirby referenced these two guys here. As I said before, the two guys flanking him on the podium that day, it's Brock Bowers and Javon Bullard. And y'all, when I say these two names now, it's almost like all you know is, oh, Javon Bullard, one of the best of this championship era. Brock Bowers, one of the greatest of all time. But that's not what they came to Georgia being. Nobody knew who Javon Bullard was. Nobody knew who he was. Kirby Smart's told the story a million times. Bullard's essentially recruiting Georgia. He's like sending them almost like a demo tape. He's like sending them film of him doing workouts during like the pandemic and stuff like that. He's trying to get on Georgia's radar. Nobody knew who Bullard was. Georgia recognized it. In the case of Brock Bowers, Bowers was not a 5-star. I mean, Bowers was an elite recruit. Bowers was, kind of called the unicorn and things like that. He did get some praise as a recruit. I'm not going to try to rewrite history here, but every recruit that Georgia's on the radar with gets a lot of, praise. But Bowers was not a 5-star. Bowers was not the can't-miss prospect. And if I'm remembering correct, Bowers didn't even have like a senior year of high school, right? Am I remembering that correct? Bowers is one of those guys that was not a guaranteed can't-miss prospect, but he arrived here and became like one of the best players in program history. Somehow, some way, Georgia just sort of saw that. That's what Georgia does. And now it thinks it sees something in Corey Howard, whether it's defensive end or defensive tackle or something else. Georgia sees something in Corey Howard, and I think that's a very good thing. Now, let me also say this. Georgia perhaps sees something in Jae Lamar, too. That's running back in this afternoon, just like Georgia got a big win down in Region 1 South Georgia yesterday. They're going to try to do the same thing for Jae Lamar this afternoon. Don't forget, we'll have live DawgNation coverage coming up 2:30 p.m. as Georgia tries to stay hot, getting its 4th straight day of having a commitment, and Lamar would be among the biggest as Georgia tries to land a major running back recruit. It's a fun time for Georgia recruiting. We're seeing them go in to get Valdosta player. We're seeing them go after a Colquitt County Packer running back today, adding players left and right. Busy time for UGA recruiting, and we're all over it right here on DawgNation. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are thankful that you're with us, and as I said, I do hope you'll join us later on this afternoon across all video channels for the big announcement from Jae Lamar, the running back there from Colquitt County. We are so thrilled to bring you live coverage of that announcement later on today, and frankly, thrilled to be previewing it here today on DawgNation Daily, and thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible. I'm driving into work every single day. I drive a long way to get here. That means I see a lot of cars and vehicles on the road when I come in, and I'm seeing them, the Breda trucks, like all the time, because it's like 125 employees, and they're all over Georgia. They're out there taking care of people when it comes to some of the most, I think, important things you can kind of deal with. Quality of life. You don't want like mosquitoes in your yard. I feel like, when it gets as hot as it is right now, we got mosquitoes the size of pterodactyls. You don't want that stuff in your yard. Our friends at Breda Pest Management can help you on that. The sort of traditional like bugs and critters and things like that. You don't want, as a general rule, you don't want wildlife in your house. And Breda Pest Management can kind of help you on that. But here's the other thing, too. We talk all the time, for various reasons, about protecting the investment that is your home. Well, you know this. In Georgia, a fact of life, it is termites. These, I think the official wood-destroying organisms, sometimes you hear them called. Well, guess what? Termites are just a thing we have in Georgia. And you already know that if you want to take good care of your home, you can't leave it unprotected from termites, because they will literally just devour the wood that keeps your house up. And what a disaster that is. So you got termite protection already, but if you're like so many of the people that I've heard from, the level of service you're getting is kind of unsatisfactory, while the cost of that service seems to keep going up. That's why it's time for you right now to make the switch to Breda Pest Management. So many of you have, and honestly, I've heard people say directly, BA, I did this because I love the fact they've been with you here on DawgNation Daily for such a long time. And let me tell you something. There is nothing that fills me with a greater sense of pride than that. I am truly thankful for that, for sure. But I also have confidence when I make the recommendation of Breda Pest Management, because I know that they've been doing this for people since 1975. Multi-generational track record of success of not just taking care of people and providing a high level of service, but doing so for a better price. That means when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management, you're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. So please, find them online. It's bredapest.com. B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com for a lot more on that today. We're so thrilled to have Breda Pest Management as a part of DawgNation Daily. Let me tell you who else we're thrilled to have today. Our buddy Cody Chaffins is going to step in today. Mike Griffith is still out of town, so we're going to speak to Cody on the program today. I'm looking forward to that. We'll kind of follow what is going on with recruiting and kind of everything else around Georgia football. Cody's obviously a great resource in all of this and does a great job here with us every day, so we'll hear from Cody coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And oftentimes on our show here, we're talking about what so-and-so is saying about Georgia coach or so-and-so is saying about Georgia players. That's generally the theme of our discussion. Today, though, we do have reason to talk about what folks may be saying about Georgia fans, in particular, the atmosphere they create between the hedges at Sanford Stadium. You know, the brand new EA Sports college football video game is kind of on its way out, the sort of second year of its return to the market. And there are kind of sort of certain football rankings coded into the system to make the game as realistic as possible. One of the things that does get considered the same way it does in the actual sport in real life is home field advantage, what kind of advantage you get playing in front of your home crowd or the challenge you face going into someone else's stadium. And it is interesting to know in the new update for EA Sports, the college ball video game, Georgia has the fourth toughest home field advantage according to those who are, kind of coding this video game here for the upcoming year. This is higher than it's been before, but for some Georgia fans, the question comes of, well, how come we're not even higher given the fact that Georgia has not lost a home game since 2019, the nation's longest home winning streak? Some are saying that alone ought to be enough to get Georgia to the very top of the list, which I guess I sort of agree with. But more important for me, though, is not where Georgia ranks on some sort of video game list, because half of y'all are playing with like Kent State anyway. The people that I know that are playing these games are playing a lot with like Kent State or Toledo or, someone like that. What I'm more interested in as it relates to this is, can the home field advantage that is now nationally recognized, can it hold for Georgia once again here this upcoming season? Because to me, there's really nothing more important than that. I think all of us have been forced to confront a practical reality when it comes to college football, which is no matter how good you are, when you look at this upcoming season, for every team, the one we talk about every day and the others, a loss is likely. And 2 is a possibility, certainly. So what can you do to contain that? What can you do to postpone the loss as long as possible? We've said that obviously is a very important thing. What do you do to keep 2 from turning into 3? Because, Georgia's projected win total kind of rests right now at about 9.5. I mean, you could be 9-3, you could be 10-2. And as a hinge point, that's pretty fascinating because last year, 9-3, which would be below the projection for Georgia, that kept Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina out of the college football playoff. On the other side of that, though, 10-2, that's what Ohio State posted on its way to a national championship. So 9-3, you're watching the playoff on TV. 10-2, you could win the national championship. Big difference between that second and third loss and finding a way to avoid that third one. And that's why playing your home games, finding a way to win those home games is so important. By now you know the schedule. You probably even know it by heart. But it's the big game against Alabama in September. More on that, by the way, before the show is done. It's the revenge game against Ole Miss. It's the Herculean clash between Georgia and Texas as conference foes for the first time in Athens in November. Let your mind wander for a moment. We've been doing this now for a while. We've been doing this for months. We're hearing more people now kind of saying this, but we've been doing this for months. What if Georgia goes undefeated at home again? What if Georgia does lean on its home field advantage, no matter where EA Sports ranks it? What if Georgia leans on that home field advantage again? I mean, wouldn't that go a long way towards putting Georgia in the real, legitimate conversation for those programs that have the very best chance of winning the national championship, like the true short list of being able to do that? I mean, wouldn't that kind of be the case? So home field advantage for Georgia is going to matter. Now, you love this, and I do too. It's fun. I feel like we all can kind of tell the season's getting closer because you kind of get the little, I don't know, there's a little tingling feeling or something. You can just sort of feel it in your bloodstream that when we talk college football, as the season gets closer, you can just kind of feel it. It feels good. I noticed that. Perhaps you do too. However, let's also be honest about this, that this is not just sort of a, happy patch on the back type of thing where we're going to, sort of say, hey, Georgia fans aren't getting given enough credit by EA Sports, and Georgia's going to go out there and its fans going to show them that between the hedges is the toughest place to play in college football. That might be the case, and I hope that it is. But just know this. Kirby Smart, who does not hold back on calling out any player, will get into the face mask of any of his players, plays no favorites, has no, there is no challenge he's unwilling to extend when necessary, calls out his own coaches on the mic during practice. Kirby Smart, who calls them out when he needs to. Just know this. He's ready to call you out too. That if somehow you're only the fourth best home field advantage, what EA Sports says you are, or if somehow on a particular day you don't even bring it to that level, just know this. Kirby Smart's going to call you out. If you are in the stadium and you bring less than your A game, you are as much of a target for his ire as any of his players would be. Here's how we know this, because last year he did. After the Auburn game, kind of a sleepy atmosphere, just sort of one of those things. Kirby Smart, who has always been ready to give Georgia fans full credit for what they do well, reserved the right to also call him out when he didn't think it was quite good enough. Let's get a reminder from last season.
We're not going to win all our games all the time. That's not going to happen. I want our fan base to appreciate what we have and give their all and be unbelievable with crowd noise and make energy and just make home games, because we need it to be tough on other teams to play here. But it's not. It's not the same as it's been in the past. It's got to be energetic. It's got to be hard. You know what? It was hot today. It was hot today. It was hot on our players too. And our players pushed through it. So I'm really proud of this team, because I thought it was a tough week, and we answered the bell.
Kirby Smart says, my players answered the bell, not quite so sure my fans did. Georgia fans, and I'm saying this half kiddingly, of course, but Georgia fans, do you want to get called out like that this year? EA Sports says you're the fourth best home field advantage in college football. You better not be. You better be better than that, because Kirby Smart doesn't settle for fourth best in anything. And Georgia fans certainly don't settle for fourth best when it comes to him and his coaches and his players' performances either. So I think this is setting up to be about as fascinating a season as I can remember for UGA. Big questions to be answered, big opportunities to provide those answers, and a home schedule that someone like me, who's been a Georgia fan for decades, has dreamed about for my, literally speaking, entire life. And the opportunity for my fellow Georgia fans to be a part of the reason why Georgia wins the game. After Arkansas in 2021, Kirby Smart looked directly into the camera and said, our fans gave us 10 points today. That's the credit he gave you for that one. After the Tennessee game in 2022, when Kirby Smart had told you going into that one, if you can speak when the game is over, you haven't yelled loud enough. But when that game was done, there was no doubting the impact that Georgia fans had made on that environment. And now here in 2025, the chance to do that again with this home slate, the chance to make it just a little bit easier for Georgia in a year in which the schedule is so challenging. What an opportunity for Georgia fans to prove EA Sports wrong, to keep Kirby Smart from calling you out again, to be ready to be the best home field advantage in all of college football. And if you are, this could be the best team in college football feeding off of that energy. And that's Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, listen, when it comes to big-time Georgia crowds and homegrown Georgia players, here's what I can tell you about our friends from Georgia Farm Bureau. They are here for all of that. And they're here for you as well. We say it all the time. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. What does that mean? If you have insurance, and obviously when it comes to auto insurance, legally you have to, and home insurance the same way, when you have insurance, you kind of go a long time sometimes without thinking about insurance. It's one of those things that you don't think about until you need it. But when you need it, when you pick up the phone and call, you want a friendly voice on the other side of that call. It's one of those things that when you really do have to utilize this service, you want the service to be there. Well, with our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, that's going to be the case. Friendly Georgians, agents, claims adjusters, things like that, right here in the great state of Georgia, just like you. They've been providing a great resource to our agricultural community for a long time, and they can do the same thing for you. Auto insurance, home insurance, life insurance, financial services needs kind of in that same sort of life insurance lane. They have all of that for you right now. So give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. Or find them online, gfbinsurance.com. Of course, that stands for Georgia Farm Bureau. gfbinsurance.com. And find out today why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. All right, before we're done, we're going to look back on a recruiting win that Georgia got a few months ago that was big at the time. I would suggest new information leads us to believe it's even bigger today. We'll talk about that and so much more. But for now, pinch hitting for Mike Griffith here on a Wednesday. Always a great thrill to talk to him. Our guy, Cody Chaffins, here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
It's great to have Cody Chaffins a part of our program today. And, Cody, we're just talking about the Georgia crowd and things like that. You do something every game that I do occasionally and have done in the past, and that's watch games from the sidelines. Now, I will say that for me, for the full 60 minutes, I do think sometimes, for me anyway, I feel like I miss certain things down the sideline because whatever you're farthest away from, you can't see quite as well. But there is one thing, and if I could wave a magic wand and make this possible, there is one thing I wish every Georgia fan got a chance to experience, to be standing on the grass when the stadium is so loud, because you can honestly feel the sound like coming from like underneath you. It hits that turf. It sort of, reverberates back up. I mean, you can really feel the ground shaking. It's hard to talk to somebody next to you. And I can only imagine what it must be as a player to be fueled by some of that kind of stuff. So we're talking about home field advantage. We're talking about, the way in which that can kind of impact a game. And obviously, I think we've seen Sanford Stadium become a place in which the Georgia crowd is very impactful in the biggest games that Georgia plays. But as someone who has this experience of kind of being down there for it, I mean, I get chills even thinking about just how intense it is. It's almost kind of scary, really, the fact that you can have that much force and energy kind of pointed in one direction right there on the playing surface. What's it like to be down there and feel it? I would say far different than the experience in the stands, and certainly way different than the experience in the press box.
Yeah, you have that feeling when you're in the stands sometimes that you're kind of screaming. You're like, I wonder if they can even hear me. When you're down there, you hear it, and it does impact you. Like I kind of have to go into my own little bubble. Luckily, I'm not trying to communicate and get a play called or tell a guy where to go line up. So I don't have to deal with all of that. But I think back to the blackout game last year against Tennessee, and it was just a crazy environment. And you played the Kirby Smart clip after the Auburn game, and it was really interesting because that game, they're definitely, especially at the end of the game, I'm getting crowd shots. That game was, it was a little bit tighter than it felt like it should be. Like the crowd felt like it was like a blowout game, and the game wasn't really a blowout game the whole time. So Kirby then calls out the crowd. What he also kind of called out that day was almost the stadium operations folks. And we saw some things change from that moment of last year through the rest of the season. And you talk about the Tennessee game, that game was played much differently from like a stadium ops perspective than was like the Auburn game. The Auburn game, you kind of had the band and there'd be some lulls. They didn't let up one moment during the Tennessee game last year. That was a time where they were playing music over the loudspeaker. I don't even know if we heard like the band do the dun, dun, dun. Right. I don't even know if we did that on fourth downs because I think they just played the speaker over and over just to try and create a louder, more chaotic environment for the Tennessee offense. So that's something that changed from early in the season to late in the season. It was really interesting to watch how the stadium ops people took that challenge from Kirby Smart. And again, you talk about not afraid to get on the mic at practice. He's not afraid to call out the fan. I'm sure he's talking to those folks wanting to get every advantage he can get because that's ultimately Kirby Smart, right? He's going to turn over every rock to figure out how he can take advantage of all the things he can.
That's exactly right. And I want to get way deeper in the weeds on this than this topic deserves, but honestly, it's just one of those days. A couple of years ago, I don't know if you went to this game or not, but a couple of years ago, for the very first time, I went to Starkville. What is it called? Davis Wade Stadium?
Yeah.
I'd never been to Starkville before, and obviously the thing they're famous for is the cowbells. And there is something I really learned about decibel science that day that I never knew before, which is one cowbell next to you is really loud and annoying. But like 60,000 cowbells are just kind of not that loud. It's one of those things where when everybody's sort of shaking the cowbells, it's actually not as loud as you think it would be. So much so that their stadium operations people are putting this stuff on the video board about don't shake the cowbells. We want you to yell. And it's really interesting. You said this a moment ago. This is what made me think about this. People kind of wonder if I yell, does it even matter? The human voice is just louder than the cowbells. And when the human voice is yelling, it is just louder. And I mean, we obviously saw with Tennessee in 2022, the continual number of like false starts and procedural penalties that took place that day. But at a place like, Mississippi State, where they're like grandfathering in the noisemaker, the artificial cowbell, which if I had a cowbell right now, our ears would be piercing. But somehow when like 60,000 cowbells are sort of ringing at the same time, it kind of becomes a little bit of a dull roar, and it's just not that loud. It's just not. The way that when everybody's sort of screaming, eventually you just can't hear anything. And I'll tell you, that Tennessee game is like a rock concert for me, where it was just, and like the Ole Miss game in 2023 was obviously like that too. I'd say last year's Tennessee game, I'm sure was like that as well. Obviously, that was the kind of the debut of the fireworks, where, I mean, it can't be good for us, but your ears are just like ringing when it's over with. Like that's how loud the human voice can be, even more so than like the music coming from the sound system kind of spurs the fans along, but it's really like that crowd noise that I think makes things really hard to hear. The music is only the thing that spurs the noise from the crowd on. People yelling, 90-something thousand people yelling, I can promise you, it makes it deafening down on the field.
And that's what you want to keep, is to keep that up. A lot of times people will wait. Again, we are getting way in the weeds on crowd noise. But like people will wait till they get to the line of scrimmage. And I think what the music they're trying to do is keep it up during the huddle, right? Like keep it while they're trying to get the calls in from the sideline, not just at the line of scrimmage. So I think that's part of what that does. And yeah, I think it's the other thing about a game like that is just it's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
It's exhausting to be on the field because you have that sensory overload happening nonstop for 3 hours. So it's one of those things. And maybe that's a factor that we don't even think about, but it's exhausting. It takes a lot more mental energy to play or be in an atmosphere and try and do your job in an atmosphere like that.
I'll say one more thing about this, and I want to talk about something different. I mean, obviously, there's a lot about my own lack of athleticism I wish was different, but I would love to know what it feels like to get a chance to feed off a crowd like that. Various Georgia players, I think, have interacted with the crowd more so than others. Like Zion Logue is a guy when he's at Georgia. He's always, kind of calling for the crowd. It always looked good on video, and he would kind of make his gestures. He seemed to really enjoy playing with the crowd, but they all must.
Pollock was like that,
Yeah,
too.
Pollock would be like that, too. That's a good point. They all must enjoy having that many people kind of cheering them on. That's one of those feelings I'll never get a chance to experience, but I do really wonder, what must it be like to have, I mean, I could use that in the morning when I'm trying to wake up or something like that, having people just sort of like spurring you along. I've always been kind of curious what it must be like to be pushed forward by a crowd like that. It's got to feel pretty good, you got to imagine.
And what it must be like to be that defensive end that lined up on the edge when the other guy knows he can't hear anything. He knows he's a step slower than you, and he's going to, you're going to beat him off the mark because that crowd's so loud.
Yeah.
It must be quite the feeling just to know you've already got an advantage, that split second that you're going to be able to beat that guy around the corner.
So Georgia gets a commitment from Corey Howard down in Valdosta. I don't know, in your career of covering high school football, how often you've been down there. I've not done a game at Valdosta, but I've been to places down there, right? We've done a game in Thomasville, a little bit smaller school now. I've been to Camden County. We had 12,000 people in the stands that night for a Colquitt County, Camden County game. Like, I have seen that region, seen that part of the state. I know how they love their high school football, and I do think that just makes the way in which the programs operate. I do think it makes it a little bit different. So, Howard, when he gets here, will be the third former Wildcat on the Georgia roster. It's kind of funny. Shelton Felton goes from being a guy that longtime UGA recruiting observers weren't really quite so sure they felt about him. All of a sudden now he's actually turned out to be pretty good for the Dawgs, I guess. But I do like it when Georgia goes into a Region 1. You pull a Howard yesterday. You may do that with Jae Lamar today. It's a pretty good spot to plant a flag, and I think that Georgia's doing a pretty good job of that at the moment, it would appear.
Yeah, you want to get guys who have played on the highest level and succeeded at the highest level. And one of the other things you think about as well, you talked about big game environments. These guys have played in big game environments where the crowd is loud, the pressure is on. You're getting pressure from the community to go out there. I've been to plenty of games around the state, and it's funny when you get to those communities where football is the most important thing, and usually you got to get out of Metro Atlanta to go find those communities. South Georgia, one of those places. You're getting pressure from everybody all week about playing in this big time atmosphere, as opposed to, some guys will play at a private school and it's, pretty quiet, honestly, on a game day when you get to some of those places. So yeah, you do want somebody who's been in big games, knows what it's like, and also has competed against the best. So when you see somebody like Corey Howard coming from a big time program at Valdosta, he's played in those Region 1 matchups that, have mattered, and he's felt that pressure and succeeded when feeling that pressure.
It's another day where a guy like Chidera Uzo-Doribe is getting some credit here. Now, obviously, Trey Scott also involved in this recruitment too. I think there's a little bit of an interesting discussion that may be ongoing about exactly what the position fit for Howard is at Georgia. Frankly, get him here and figure that out as far as I'm concerned. But, boy, for a guy that did not have much of a profile before arriving at Georgia, just young, right? He's just kind of getting started in his coaching career. Uzo-Doribe getting a lot of love. We're used to hearing that for Trey Scott. But, frankly, Georgia fans, I think, never really get tired of it because it's these position coaches that kind of craft a relationship that sort of really act as the point of contact for so many of these families. The fact that so many of these guys for Georgia continuing to operate in the same standard that has been set at UGA, I think Georgia fans take a lot of comfort in that.
And he had a lot of pressure on him this offseason, right? When Damon Wilson leaves, what's this, position group going to look like? What can we get out of this position group? And so, yeah, seeing these recruiting wins that you get on the trail when you get a guy like Kamari Brooks out of North Oconee earlier this week, showing your mettle there. Now the next step is, what can we get on the field this year? What can we get out of Quintavious Johnson as he comes in? Gabe Harris, can he take the next step? So love to see that. But yes, you'll take a big win on the recruiting trail. And going back, you played the clip earlier from Kirby Smart after the TCU game. That was Uzo-Doribe's first year there, and even that day, Kirby's like, all right, these guys put together a great game plan, but moving forward and watching him kind of progress now, you've been in the program for a few years, you've picked up the tricks from Kirby Smart about what it takes to be a big-time recruiter, and Kamari Brooks said it over and over. It was that relationship with him is the reason he chose Georgia. Revealed that shirt earlier this week.
No, I think that's right. Let me shift in our time remaining here to Jae Lamar, running back, Colquitt County, down in Moultrie, going to make his decision later on this afternoon. I think there are two things of note worth discussing about what's going to go down with Lamar. First of all, we have seen these programs kind of become competitors to Georgia in many ways using, obviously, prodigious NIL, and I don't fault them for trying to use whatever the rules provide, and Miami clearly has been a big spending program. It's created a certain level of, hubris on their part at times, and I think, recently they may have thought they had kind of, hosted Lamar on the visit and made the impression on him where they might would have even convinced him not to take the Georgia visit. Well, obviously that didn't happen. Lamar was here just at Georgia. And maybe today is a chance for Georgia to get a recruiting win over Miami. I find that to be a valuable part of this. But I'll also say this, Cody, I do think that as Georgia has thrown the ball better in recent years, and there's no doubt Georgia throws it more and for more success than it did in the past, there's no free lunch. There's going to be always a trade-off with everything. And I do think the running game from a statistical standpoint now for a good number of years for Georgia, not just last year, but kind of even this national championship era, Georgia doesn't quite run it with the same level of success that it once did. I do think kind of finding a boost for the running game overall, and hopefully without sacrificing anything from the passing attack. But I do think in future years, Georgia finding a little bit more success with the ground game, I think that could be a pretty good mission for this program to go on. And obviously a prospect the caliber of Lamar would certainly make that easier in the future too.
Yeah, you want to see a guy like that get here and make a difference. Love to see what Nate Frazier can do on that front this year. But yeah, talk about running the ball. And Georgia's kind of resulted to throw in a lot of those screen passes, and they treat that as the running game. But no, if you can get the downhill, control the clock, especially with the clock rules now, if you can control the clock, you control a lot more because there's just not that many plays being had in the first quarter of games, and the games get much, much shorter. So getting a guy like Jae Lamar, taking away from Miami, where I think Miami's also going to throw some money at Derek Cooper, right, who was kind of the other guy. Savion Hyder is going to be another NIL kind of recruitment from the running backs of 2026. So getting Jae Lamar, a place like Colquitt County, a lot of dog people down there, especially after Dejan Edwards comes up here and does this thing and leads the team in rushing touchdowns a couple of years ago. So there's a precedent there. But yeah, Jae Lamar, really, really interesting story. I can't wait. I'm sure Jeff Sintel will tell more of that story coming up today as we have him live down there in Moultrie for this announcement. But he's already written articles about kind of Jae Lamar's story and kind of the ups and downs. He's a guy who's got a gunshot wound in his leg, so he's seen some rough times, but has actually turned his life around and really committed to football here. So exciting to hear more of that from Jeff today. And and Kirby Smart always talks about relationships, and this is one of those people you can, coaches down there at Colquitt County can trust the coaches at Georgia, make sure he's going to the right place and doing the right things, because you are about to get a bunch of money no matter where he goes. Even if he comes to Georgia, he's going to make money. And so making the right decisions with that, you got to find somebody you trust, and relationships matter in this.
All right, so if it does go down today, that'll be 4 days in a row with a commit. Very easily could be 5 tomorrow with Craig Dandridge getting ready to make his announcement. There's a possibility you could get a 6th straight day on Friday. And with Calicut and Malachi Lee both going on Friday, there is at least some chance that Georgia could add 7 commitments over a 6-day span, which I can't imagine they've ever done before. Have you ever seen the program on such a devouring pace the way that it is right now as it kind of chomps up all of these commits?
No, it's such a heater. And what's so interesting about this one is, at least so far this week, it's been all state of Georgia, right?
Yeah.
So you look at, Kamari Brooks from North Oconee and Corey Howard from Valdosta kind of working their way, and Corey Howard's not on this because we didn't stream him yesterday, kind of working their way clockwise around the state. Jae Lamar, if they could get him today, Dandridge are going to go back up to Milton. And looking at the class breakdown so far, you're talking about so far before Lamar, you got 12 recruits from in the state of Georgia as opposed to 8 out. Now the 8 out pretty big-time recruits, right. Ekeneg, Boko, Jared Curtis, some of the guys to mention there. But it's been kind of a putting this fence around Georgia, which hasn't been a thing necessarily for Kirby Smart over the years. He's recruited so well nationally, and when you have a big-time brand like Georgia, you can do that. But it feels different because all these Georgia guys commit after commit after commit. And it kind of makes you wonder, is this one of those things? Is this a trend bigger for Georgia as they look at the look at the transfer portal and say, hey, we don't want to get kids who are just going to work, be here for a year and then they get homesick or they want to go try somewhere else. If they're closer to home and grandma can come watch him play every Saturday, does that make a difference? So I wonder if it's like a cultural shift for Georgia recruiting differently than they have, or it just so happens we're just getting all these guys in a row all from the state of Georgia.
No, I think that's a really good question. Certainly something we'll be watching very, very closely. Obviously this afternoon, Jae Lamar, can't wait to have that. Here on the DawgNation video channels, fun stuff with Craig Dandridge tomorrow. Cody, you're an invaluable part of all this for us. We appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Braided Pest Management today as well.
I'll be back here pressing the buttons. Join us live.
Sounds good.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think Cody does ask a good question about all of that, which is, well, how come it is so much kind of right here together? And I think you got a couple things going on. We can bring that music down just slightly. I think there are a couple things going on with that. A, the recruiting calendar is like just really smashed together right now. So much so that I do think at some point in time, and I've been kind of in favor of not doing a signing period in, like, say, July, because I'd like to see the coaches get some break at some point in time. And obviously, I think that the earlier you make the signing period, the less space you create for guys to earn an offer at a place like Georgia because of a really good senior year. So I'm not really in favor of, like, moving the signing period up in the calendar very much. But the fact that all of this is happening right now, but then technically the signing period isn't until December, that seems incongruent. There seems to be a disconnect between the flurry of activity in the summer, and then we just sort of push pause and all of that, and then all these guys, to the extent this even still matters anymore, sign letters of intent coming up in December. So you kind of wonder about that. I mean, July and August are both dead for visits. Therefore, all the visits took place in June. And so a lot of these commitments are just the natural consequence of all the visits that just took place. It just so happens they're kind of lined up in a row because the visits themselves were sort of lined up in a row. And that's the way that goes down. There's also this, too. I mean, if if Lamar commits to Georgia today, that'll be Georgia's 21st commitment. There's still a good number of names that are still out there for Georgia. We may see Georgia just sign a pretty large number of guys. So why are there so many right here together? Well, part of that's because Georgia just may have kind of sights set on a very big signing class overall. That's also worth considering here too. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, because much like Georgia recruits great players, I'm trying to recruit you for a great experience on board a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I mean, whether you're on our DawgNation cruise in April when we set sail once again for Utopia of the Seas, or sometime between now and then on your own version of a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Here's what I love. I'm obviously a very big fan of Royal Caribbean. You guys already know that. I want to be on as many Royal Caribbean cruise vacations as I can. And the job of kind of talking about Royal Caribbean, frankly, every day is always so much fun because there are so many new things being rolled out or, sailed out. In the case of Star of the Seas, its construction process is essentially done, constructed there in Finland, and all of the bells and whistles that make a ship like this not just look cool and have fun things, but also the navigation part of this, the propulsion part of this, the stuff that's the ship part, right? I mean, these are still ships after all. Well, pretty soon it's going to be heading its way towards Port Canaveral, and folks get a chance to be on it coming up in August. I'm looking forward to my chance to hopefully be on Star of the Seas at some point in time in the very near future too. What a great experience that's going to be, a part of many new things on the way for Royal Caribbean. The debut of the Royal Beach Club in Nassau in the Bahamas in December. You've got Legend of the Seas, another icon class of ship on the way shortly after this. Perfect Day coming to Mexico here very soon. There's going to be a Royal Beach Club there in Cozumel. There are so many fun things. 3 new ships to be amplified in the Royal Caribbean fleet. There is so much fun new stuff on the way for Royal Caribbean, and our good friend Jessica Slater, a travel advisor specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean, is there to tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Great travel advisor, wants to tell you all about that. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC just for a moment. I saw where Joel Klatt had his list the other day of the 10 biggest games of the 2025 season. And on his list was Alabama. And Klatt made some of the same points you'd sort of expect him to make. About Georgia's got pressure to prove that it's still Georgia. That's sort of to be expected in this overall conversation. But I do think, especially in light of what we've been saying all day long, I do think we should not shortchange or discount or even for a second overlook the fact that when Alabama does come here, it is, for both sides, about as big as a football game can be. And honestly, for me, it's less about the long-standing history for Georgia with Alabama, but I'm not going to pretend that doesn't at least matter. It at least matters some. Of course, we know that. But this is also, for me, more about, as I've said, if a loss is inevitable and if 2 are likely, maybe even probable, odds makers would say probable, if that's the case, then your strategy for success is to avoid that loss as long as you possibly can. And that's what beating Alabama in terms of the practical reality of this season would be about. But of course we know there's more than just the practical reality. Human beings are emotional creatures. We're not logic based, we're emotion based. And the emotion of this opponent, this ugly uniform, this bland helmet, that crimson and cream or whatever it is they are, that uniform, that opponent has just been a stumbling block. It was a year ago. It was the 2023 SEC championship. Now, listen, Alabama hadn't won a national championship in half a decade, and Georgia's won 2. But nonetheless, we don't shortchange and we don't sugarcoat the fact that Georgia does need to beat Alabama with more frequency. So that emotional backstory will, of course, be a part of this game. And on the flip side, Klatt also correct to point out that for Kalen DeBoer, it's sort of time for him to put his own stamp on the Alabama program, that he inherited Nick Saban's Alabama program, but in many ways, because it's his offensive coordinator now, it'll be his handpicked quarterback now, so much of this sort of feels like Kalen DeBoer's Alabama. And what's that going to be for a team that missed the playoff a year ago? You got to feel like in many ways they need to be in the playoff here this year. Now, my overall opinion, and you don't like this, but I have to give you my honest assessment. I try to be as candid as I can be. Going into this upcoming season, I believe that Alabama is undervalued. I do. I believe that Alabama stands as an incredibly tough opponent for Georgia. And if we think of the most likely playoff teams in the SEC, for me, I would have Alabama right now ahead of some of those teams that are trying to get in. LSU, for instance. I like what Shane Beamer's doing in South Carolina, but if we're honest with ourselves, Alabama also beat them a year ago. That until South Carolina proves that in a game like that, I would have to rank Alabama, I think, ahead of South Carolina, although I certainly give the Gamecocks a chance. Given last year Tennessee beats Alabama, but if you see the same two teams playing this year, does that same result replicate itself? Could Tennessee really beat them for a third time in 4 years? My initial hunch, and I reserve the right to change my mind, my initial hunch is no, probably not. I think Alabama's a good team, and I think this is a gigantic game, and I'll reinforce the point we made a little earlier. What a day for Georgia fans to be at their best. This is your first time in the Kirby Smart era to see Bama in your own stadium. My guess is that day you'll be ready. I saw where Steve Spurrier had some interesting comments on Arch Manning, essentially reflecting what we do hear a lot from other fans, whether it be Georgia fans or anybody that's sort of not a Texas fan, which is, are we sure Arch Manning is everything that everybody's telling us he is? I mean, some publications making him a first-team All-American quarterback. Boy, that seems like a lot. Now, I think Manning's probably pretty good, but that prediction, while it could come true, seems like a lot. The other point that Spurrier brings up that a lot of people talk about, well, if he's so good, how come he didn't play last year with Quinn Ewers? And the fact that, as we predicted, and we get plenty wrong, but we get some stuff right too. And coming into the season, we said, when we look at Quinn Ewers, we don't see a special quarterback. And Ewers was not a special quarterback for Texas a season ago. And Steve Spurrier, perhaps rightly so in the eyes of many, saying, well, if Ewers wasn't special and Arch backed him up, are we really sure Arch Manning's going to be everything he was cracked up to be? And here's my only answer to this, and I'm obviously a long way from Austin, Texas, and frankly, thankfully so. But here is the one assumption I sort of make about that. I believe that the situation that Steve Sarkisian has been dealing with at Texas is pretty complicated. I believe that, and I hate to use a word like politics or something like that. I don't mean electoral politics, but I do believe that there was a strong desire on the part of people at Texas to see Quinn Ewers succeed at Texas. And I do think in this NIL age we live in, there's a little more patience on the part of some backup quarterbacks where they say in so many ways, if you're going to pay me, it's your choice of whether or not you want to play me. And Manning got paid without necessarily having played. And he's more than happy to have his moment here right now. And frankly, he may, according to some of the chatter, he may even come back to Texas in 2026, that he's just not apparently in that big of a hurry. And so therefore, he was sort of okay with this a year ago. And Texas, I think, really wanted one of their favorite sons to have his chance to succeed. And if we're being honest, other than games against Georgia, Ewers almost did it. They made the Final Four. They got pretty close to winning a national championship. And ultimately, Ewers was just kind of not the guy. He ended up being sort of a late-round draft pick. And it's sort of a disappointing conclusion. But the fact that Ewers, and I know we're also cynical these days, but I'm actually not very cynical about this. I just don't think Quinn Ewers wanted to play anywhere else other than Texas. And that was still true, even if another program was going to give him millions of dollars, which I think another program would have done. I don't think Ewers wanted it because I think Ewers only wanted to play for Texas. And I know that sounds dumb because Ewers technically came to Texas after having been at Ohio State. I do realize that this is not a perfect story, But I do believe it's a true story that Ewers only wanted to play at Texas, had a deep tie to the state and the program, and therefore people who really care about Texas football not only wanted to see Texas win, they wanted to see Texas win with Ewers. The job of being a head coach, in other words, is pretty complicated. And sometimes it's complicated for reasons that don't get sort of a public airing. And I have a hunch that the management situation of the quarterback at Texas a year ago between Ewers and Manning, although both those guys I think always said the right things, managing those quarterbacks for Steve Sarkisian, if I had to guess, was probably a pretty complicated situation. So Spurrier asks a fair question. If Arch is so good, how come he didn't take over for Quinn Ewers? It is a very fair question. At face value, it seems like a simple question. I think the answer is probably a little bit more complicated. Finally, speaking of quarterbacks, I'll mention this, and I don't take pleasure in saying this because to the extent that his interests don't conflict with mine, I'm a pretty big fan of Dan Lanning. I think that Lanning is probably the best of the young coaches in college football, a guy who I think is going to eventually, be up there near the top of the coach in the sport if he's not there already. It is fair to point out, though, it has been a little bit of a cold streak as of late for Oregon recruiting. There was the guy that Lanning jumped in the swimming pool for, that ended up decommitting. They went after Jared Curtis against Georgia. They didn't quite win that. And you'll remember, they sort of kicked a quarterback prospect to the curb as a way of focusing on Curtis, and still that wasn't quite enough to get that done. Well, in the immediate aftermath of losing out on Curtis, they sort of immediately pivoted to a guy named Ryder Lyons, who perhaps you know. And if you watch, say, the McAfee show, maybe you saw this yesterday, Lyons announced his commitment on air with McAfee. He's going to BYU. Now, first of all, it's quite a moment for BYU. I don't follow basketball recruiting really, but they just nailed like some gigantic basketball recruit, right? Didn't they do something like that? And now they're getting Ryder Lyons in football. The Cougars are having themselves quite a moment here. But I'm more interested in this on the Oregon side, that it's gone a little quiet for Oregon recruiting right now. And I'm sure they'll have a big flurry to end the cycle. I would be surprised if they didn't. It's a little quiet here at the moment, but maybe more interesting than that, maybe more important than that. If you want to see how sizable Georgia's win for Jared Curtis was, this was not a home state advantage. Georgia leaned on that and has leaned on that, as Cody Chaffins pointed out, for some of the recruiting wins here recently. Jared Curtis is from Nashville. And, while Nashville's not the farthest place away from Athens, it's not in-state, and it's not a bunch of Georgia fans in that school there in Nashville hoping he picks UGA. And if we're talking about airfare, you can fly from Nashville to Portland and then take the drive from Portland to Eugene. You can't do that. It's not super easy, but you can do that. So Georgia didn't necessarily have the home field advantage in battling for Curtis, but they still won. And they still beat out, we're led to believe, a bunch of Oregon dollars in order to be able to do that. So the fact that Oregon has now missed out on its plan B, Ryder Lyons, after having missed out on Jared Curtis, I do think that reinforces just how significant the Jared Curtis win was for Georgia. We celebrated as UGA fans at the time, and now the extra context leads you to believe it's even more significant than maybe we first realized. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, before we sign off here today, let's give a shout out to our friends at Dr. Pepper. And of course, this time of year, you're out there shopping, your local Kroger. It's hot. That means you got to pick up the extra beverages to kind of keep people kind of cool and refreshed. You're around the pool or hanging out with friends. You just want to keep, plenty of beverages on hand. And that means the rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper is, of course, a big part of that. And as you're shopping for Dr. Pepper here right now, not only do I want you to look for the brand new Dr. Pepper Blackberry and Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar, I also want you to look for the specially themed Dr. Pepper cans in honor of the brand new summer blockbuster movie Jurassic World Rebirth. We love the fact that the Jurassic Park universe is getting explored for more content here. A fun new summer movie, and a great way to celebrate that with these specially themed cans with our friends at Dr. Pepper. So as you're picking up some Dr. Pepper here this summer, try that Dr. Pepper Blackberry, the Dr. Pepper Blackberry Zero Sugar, and enjoy those special cans celebrating the brand new movie, Jurassic World Rebirth. Make sure you check that out today. Really fun golden shoe here today. I, for the most part, just sort of live in the studio all the time. I have a pretty simple life altogether. I do live vicariously through many of you who are taking fascinating travel, and you're doing some really cool things during the summer. And I'm just so thankful I have such a, I don't know, just a worldly audience that just goes to interesting places, does interesting things. And the fact that you would take me with you as you go, boy, what a cool thing. Let me celebrate that as a part of our Golden Shoe today. How about Brian Weller writing in to say, DawgNation Daily is keeping me company on my train from Florence to Venice. That's Italy for you folks from Northeast Georgia. On his way from Florence to Venice, he says, the European mind cannot comprehend. The picture shows it. Me doing the R.S. Andrews cool down, the train rolling along there. What a fun thing that is, Brian. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Brian Weiler, by the way, I should say. Brian Weiler, I should say on that. Pardon me, Brian. Really appreciate that. Well-deserved Golden Shoe going your direction. That is a lot of fun. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? Not fun for them. Long time since they've beaten Georgia, about 1,691 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator hater updater. They'll be taking no trains in Europe, but there is a train coming down the track for them later on this fall. Keep a good thought about that. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. And, of course, as I said, we'll see you tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, but we'll see you later on this afternoon for live coverage of four-star running back Jae Lamar from down in Moultrie, Georgia, as he gets ready to make his commitment announcement. Now, I want to take your comments here. We'll talk about anything you want to. Let me also take a moment to plug in here. So just pardon me for 1 second here. I've never been very graceful enough to do the plug-in thing. It's even less graceful now than it used to be, just because we've got a little bit of a different desk set up around here. But we'll take some comments nonetheless and kind of see what's on everybody's mind. Let me do some YouTube here. We'll see how everybody's doing. All right, let's see what else. Al Chandler says he's not a fan of the Manning family, and I do get that. I mean, while I don't find Peyton or Eli to be necessarily all that distasteful, I think when it comes to, there's a little bit of a pushback sometimes against the perception of royalty, and the Mannings sort of feel like, in the eyes of some, football royalty. It's Archie Manning giving way to Peyton and Eli, giving way to now Arch, sort of a next generation of Manning quarterback. And for a lot of people, they're like, this feels like a little too much for me. I do get that. I do get that. I don't necessarily feel that way myself. I'm probably not even as anti-royalty as other people are. But I do get that. Wyatt Fielding says he's very excited for what he calls the real deal in Jae Lamar. So a strong recommendation coming by way of Wyatt Fielding here. Spencer Clark on Georgia without Dell McGee. I think that McGee is a great coach. I wish him really, really great success there at Georgia State. I do think that Josh Crawford in McGee's stead, no easy shoes to fill, of course. I do think that Crawford has a real chance to make a name for himself. And going to a place like Colquitt County where he knows he worked there, he has, those South Georgia ties, very valuable. I do think recruiting battles like this are a real way for him to make a real name for himself, and perhaps today he will do that. Alan Hampton says if Stockton's name was Gunnar Manning, he would be getting more celebrated. I think that's probably true. It's also an amazingly cool name. Amazingly cool name, if that were the one. Brodo Baggins says he loves Georgia football, and I'm right there with you on that. Tennille says you could not have lived through the 90s and like Peyton. Well, listen, I do get that. There was certainly a lot of that back then. I guess when I think about like who really gets the largest taste of my vitriol, I guess it's others. But I get the point that you're making. Paul Moon mentioned the fact that Gunnar Stockton doesn't really do, as he calls them, the kind of the glamour camps. Yeah, Stockton has certainly not cultivated his own celebrity status. That's 100% true, and that does impact a lot of this. Let us see what else. Jaywalk also reminding us that Tennessee's national championship actually came after Peyton Manning left, which is quite true. What else is going on here today? Texas Dog having himself a good day in here. Good to see Texas Dog in here. Foster Moss. I mean, I definitely drink my Dr. Pepper in the heat. I definitely, when it gets hot outside, you better believe I got my cooler full of Dr. Pepper ready to go there on that. Now, I'm also drinking water and things like that too. I don't do anything exclusively, but get you one of those Dr. Peppers down at the bottom of the cooler. That thing, cooler technology is amazing to me right now. It's amazing how well these things work. They're heavy as all get out. It's amazing to me that as coolers have gotten better at their job, they've also gotten just significantly heavier. It's the only thing in life that's gotten heavier. Have you noticed that? That when you were a kid, it took 4 guys to lift a TV set. Now you can just sort of tote a TV set under your arm. Like everything has gotten lighter but coolers. I find that to be interesting. But boy, they keep drinks cold now. They keep drinks cold. Chef Jay Bowen says the Georgia, Bama, or Texas game is going to be lit no matter what they do. If you can't get up and get excited for those games, you're dead, son. I would say that's probably true. Chef Jay Bowen also reminding us that when we speak about what Quinn Ewers is, the undeniable high moment for his career was going into Alabama, winning in 2023. And on that particular day, Ewers played like an elite quarterback. I would say that he didn't really match that in other moments during his career, but that particular day he did. That is true. Let's go to DawgNation.com. Thomas T-Bone 86 asking about Jae Lamar. 2:30 this afternoon. We'll be live probably around 2:15 or so. UJ Marine says that people have gotten heavier. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You ever go to like these old houses and things like that? It's just amazing how people used to, I guess, just have a much higher tolerance for like smaller stuff, I guess. But boy, when you see how small some of these old houses are, you realize, man, I guess people used to be really small. Let's see what else. UJ Marine also echoing some of what we've heard, saying, I get sick of the Manning hype. Pat's own Peyton Manning. He rode the Denver defense for his second Super Bowl. Eli rode the Giants defense for both his wins. Yeah, he says not like either one carried the team. Well, it's certainly true that that the Denver Super Bowl that Manning was a part of, that was a defensive-led Super Bowl. There's no doubt about that. I would say in the case of Eli, and I don't want to turn myself into the Manning defender because, frankly, I'm not like the biggest Manning fans either. But I do think it's shortchanging Eli to say that, while those were, like both the Super Bowls that Eli won in New York, I believe those were both, weren't they 9-7 teams? So like neither team was necessarily a great team. And they did have obviously OCU Manure and all those defensive pieces. Strahan, of course, I guess too. But Manning himself, meaning Eli, did play really well in the postseason. He did make some throws along the way. And in the case of Eli, he also beat what I think is kind of viewed as maybe the best team in any sport never to win a championship, which was it 07 New England Patriots team. So, I think that Eli's postseason results, I think you got to give him credit for that. In the case of Peyton, this is a guy, whether it be college losses against Florida, a lot of losses to the New England Patriots, this was not really a big game quarterback. And as time passes, people have a tendency to forget that Manning is this revered figure, and deservedly so. He's one of the best of his generation, but not a big game quarterback in terms of making the sort of clutch throws that led to a lot of wins. That's true. Randy Hall says if we get these recruits that are projected to us, we should have the number one class at this stage of the year. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of curious if can Georgia get, like, one of the big questions I have, and I don't know the answer to this, can Georgia get somebody who they're sort of not quite expected to get? You know, we mentioned like a few times like James Johnson. That's a defensive lineman I'd love to see Georgia get. Feels like a tough pull, but could you get him? You know, we talk about Derek Cooper. You know, could you get him? Like is there a get out there for Georgia that's sort of beyond the boundaries of kind of what you expect him to get? Because Randy's right. If you just knock down these commitments that you sort of think you're going to get, that's pretty good. But can you get like one of these you're not quite expected to get, or at least a little bit more of a degree of difficulty to it? Because that could really change things. Let's see what else. Randy Hall mentioning the passing of Sly Stone, of course, from Sly and the Family Stone. That one song, the one that, that Dance to the Music, is obviously one of the most beloved songs. Wait, is that it? Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah. One of the most beloved songs of all time. I don't know a ton beyond just that one song, of course, but certainly a beloved musical group. DT says he's torn his rotator cuff. He's going to have surgery upcoming. He says hopefully he'll get his 100-mile-an-hour fastball back after that. Well, DT, we certainly wish you well on that. Hope you get your velo back up again after the shoulder surgery. Let's get some Facebook comments and see how people are doing over there. Then we're going to get off the air in a little bit. We got some more stuff too. Don't forget, next week, a little bit different for us. That's why I'm wearing the same. Yeah, this has sort of become my vacation week uniform, just because it's simple to wear while we're recording. So we're going to have pre-recorded shows on Monday and Tuesday of next week, and a portion of Wednesday and Thursday pre-recorded, with also live content from Jeff and Kaylee on Wednesday, special edition Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, and on Thursday, a special edition of DawgNation at Large to go along with some stuff from me. Leading into the 4th of July, I'm going to take some time to be with my family next week, and then on the other side of that, we're just like hardcore all the way through with the football season. So we've talked a little bit about being in a summer cadence as of late. Well, our summer cadence will come to a conclusion after next week. So we're kind of set up and ready to enjoy all of that. Wayne Kirkland says it's difficult to get excited about recruiting until they actually move in on campus. I do get that. I also think there's a chance that in the revenue sharing world, the notion of, well, a commitment doesn't mean what it used to. I think commitments may actually mean something again now, because I think part of like the shutdown, because remember, we're seeing a flurry of commits to Georgia right now. A few days ago, we saw a flurry of commits shut down their recruitments and essentially saying we're taking no more offers from anybody else. I think the new revenue sharing world is creating a situation where a lot of recruits want to sort of secure their spot, get those payments, be in line to get the offer that a place like Georgia's providing them. So I think we may actually see, if I had to predict, the potential of more commitments sticking in the future. Brandon Griffin says, can't wait to see Dylan Bell this year, our Swiss Army knife. Yeah, I love the fact that he's sort of backed to, I think, being a Swiss Army knife again. I think that could be really good. Let me also warn you of one small thing. When you see the sort of like Manning fatigue that exists in our chat, when you see some Manning fatigue, I think the one thing you got to be on guard for is and it's just sort of a natural consequence of human nature. Manning fatigue leads to what I would suggest is a little bit of an artificial skepticism of Arch. In other words, in some corners of the media, when you hear some people say, are we sure Arch Manning is this good? It's not a totally unfair question, but some of the motivation for that question kind of comes from a place of, are we just a little tired of these Mannings and the media love they seem to get? just be aware of that. In other words, I'm not ready to tell you that Arch Manning is going to be the greatest college quarterback of all time. I'm really not. But if you get where I'm coming from when I say this, I am skeptical of some of the skepticism too, for the reasons I just mentioned. Eric Ray also mentioning P.J. Dean. So that's the half-brother of Jared Wilson, and that's another one of these that's coming up. What is it, Eric? Is that June 30th for P.J. Dean? Is that right? And P.J. Dean's a defensive lineman, not an offensive lineman. Yeah, what is that? June 30th, I think, for P.J. Dean. I think that's right. Let's see what else. And Eric, if I've got that right, make sure I do. Make sure I do. Randy Hood says it's all about God, family, and Georgia friends. Go Dogs. Randy, I'm right there with you on all that. I'm right there with you on all that. In that order, my friend. Very well said. Jacob O'Neill's apparently having phone problems. I'm sorry to hear that. But a lot of fun stuff going on over there on Facebook. All right. Couple more comments. We got to get ready to go. Let's see what else. Bill Camacho checking out. Bill, we're going to be doing that very soon here too. DT says he can't lift his shoulder even to 45 degrees right now. I do know that's incredibly painful, I'm sure, and also, just impacts your mobility, your quality of life. I do get that. And I am sorry, and I hope that goes well. I really do. Keep us updated, please. All right, over here on YouTube for a couple of final comments. Tennille says, yes, we're sick of the Mannings. I'm sure we're all in agreement on that. So Tennille speaks very, very plainly and clearly on that. Wyatt Fielden says that PJ is on Friday. Is that right? I thought that was later than that. But y'all would probably know better than me. Offensive lineman from Hawaii is the same day. So I know Chase Calicut. Are you sure that PJ Dean's on Friday? Because I know Chase Calicut is on Friday. That's the defensive back. Are we sure? I thought that Dean was later than that. Jonathan Aaron says, you talked about feeding off the crowd earlier. I thought you always did when it comes to doing those belly flops. Listen, I love the energy on a cruise ship. Love all of that. I am not going to be doing belly flops and things like that. That is not my style. But I'm glad that some people do enjoy that. Okay, so it is 30th. Yeah, it is 30th. Yeah, so P.J. Dean, half-brother of Jared Wilson, I think it's half-brother. Half-brother of Jared Wilson is on the 30th of June. So next week they're on that. And it sounds like Georgia's a pretty big factor in all this too, as you would expect they would be for him. And I'm glad to have y'all help me keep up with all this, because I tell you right now, I can barely keep up with all this, and it's not going to really slow down. I mean, you got two different guys on July 12th. You got obviously Caden Prothro on the 12th. Derek Cooper, I believe, is the same day. So it's like, crazy June. But, I mean, a lot of this stuff's going to sort of stretch into July as well. Al Chandler says, I don't turn down a chance to go on a cruise. That is mostly true, although, my opportunity to go on Star of the Seas, believe it or not, I actually chose work over Star of the Seas. Believe it or not, I did. Believe it or not. So I'd give anything. If Star of the Seas had been any different time, I'd be there and ready to be I very, very thankful to say this. This is not bragging. This is gratitude. Like basically the first one on the ship for Utopia of the Seas, for Icon of the Seas, for Wonder of the Seas. I mean, I've done like 3 of these, like among the very first people to put feet on the deck, on the deck. Not going to get to do that for Star of the Seas, but if I have my way after the football season, I will find some way to be on Star of the Seas. If I have my way, that is what I'm going to do. Indeed, that is the case. But next week, I'm not going on a cruise. Next week, we're just laying low. We like to kind of lay low every now and then. And next week, we're going to lay low. It's like, it's not just me who, obviously does this, but, the whole family, we just all have a lot going on. And so when you can find that week where everybody just sort of has nothing, no sports, no church, or whatever might be going on at any given time, right? Just nothing. And lay low and unplug, because on the other side of that, you blink your eyes, you're sort of back into it all the things that kind of the family has going on. So I do think kind of truly unplugging, that means for me, probably no phone, certainly no laptop, like really just leaving it all for somebody else. And that's what I plan on doing. I love my Royal Caribbean Cruise vacations, of course, but next week we're just laying low. UGA_ predicts a Georgia win against Alabama this year, which I'll take. I'm happy to hear it. I am happy to hear it. All right, we are going to go for now. Y'all, thanks for being here. Make sure you find our friends at RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That means with it being as hot as it is right now, you're kind of worried about, what happens if your air conditioning goes out. And some of you in the back of your mind, you kind of know how old your AC is, if we're being honest. And if you kind of know, boy, mine's at the end of its shelf life, it could happen any day. Don't spend all summer worrying about that. Get the peace of mind you need by getting your AC kind of tuned back up to factory fresh specs. What that means is that old unit that's sort of past its expected life, you can get some new life into that old unit with our friends at RS Andrews. They can show you how. It's amazing. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Let me give it to you again. It's rsandrews.com. Have a great day as well. We'll see you this afternoon, 2:30 or 2:15 or so, for Jae Lamar live from Moultrie. And then back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.